no dicho por nosotros, es decir, transformativo.
by being here. If you could please take your seats, we're going to get started.
Actually, I think I'll be able to sit through this. So we'll talk later, but I really do want to dig into that.
No, it's a big deal.
I'll tell you what.
When is it? 20th and 20th this month? Oh, I might be there. Let's see. I could see.
So we're limited to 10 minutes, correct?
I'm going to be short.
No, right?
I'm.
So we can answer questions.
Yep.
My role is just to let you know that this session will be in the hands of Congressman Scott Peters, who represents San Diego, city on the border, city with the busiest border crossing in the world, a person who knows the border and understands the issues of a border city and how to deal with those issues here in Washington. So it's really our honor to have him preside over this panel and be able to introduce the other panelists who I know you already all know, but you'll hear about from Congressman Scott Peters.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. I thought what I'd do is give you a little bit of perspective of how I come to this and then make sure that we leave most of the time for the experts to my left, who I'll introduce in a moment. As Chris said, I'm Scott Peters. I'm a freshman Congress member. I represent the northern part of the city of San Diego, not the part right on the border. And it's a little significant because I think that the person that I beat to take the office was not someone who was as interested in the promoting the border from the north part of our city. And what's happened is in our city, we've recognized throughout the region the business imperative of a functioning border. When I was first elected, I went to our Chamber of Commerce and I asked them, what is your biggest priority? You know, I didn't know what it would be. And they said, reducing the border waits. I have some statistics here that about the effect of border waits at the San Diego-Tijuana border. To the national effect of border delays that we've seen is about $7.2 billion in lost economic impact and over 60,000 jobs nationally. Locally, losses to us, economic activity in the range of $2 to $2.5 billion a year. Our whole port itself, our seaport, generates about $3 billion in economic impact a year. So just the loss, just the delta between what we're doing and what we should be doing at the land port, almost that big. And so we've worked hard to try to create some good cooperation and function around doing what we need to do. And for some time, there's been planned a new border crossing at San Ysidro, our land port. We have to give credit to Mexico because they have done their part, finished their construction, not just on time, but ahead of time. And folks who looked at the border saw that we were behind in the United States. We had a three-phase project. It's all very well planned. It's been authorized, but money had not been appropriated except for the first phase. And so we're working on the first phase, but right now what you see is the two ends don't meet. And so it's sort of the beautiful Mexican facility now and our facility that's kind of under construction and a kind of road across between the two of them, meant to service the busiest land port. Well, there was some good news out of Congress. And what we did early on was I'm a Democrat. The other two Democrats representing our region, Juan Vargas, who represents the border, and Susan Davis and we came together. We asked the president to put the next phase in the budget, about $226 million. He did. We asked then our two senators, Senator Feinstein and Senator Boxer, who are from Northern California, but still sympathetic to support our request, and they did. And then we had to figure out how to get something from the House of Representatives, where nothing was happening. And fortunately, you may have noticed that we finally had a budget agreement, the first budget agreement in 3 years, that Congressman Ryan and Senator Murray crafted. After that, we did appropriations, and we got our two Republican colleagues from San Diego to support us in making this request. And we did get funding for the next phase, $226 million, and we got a similar request in for the final phase. So in San Diego, our attitude toward the border is become unified. We understand the importance of binational trade, that we are a mega region. We have a lot of overlap and a lot of opportunity. And so at least in our little neck of Congress, cooperation is improving. Clearly in Congress, we still have disputes about whether we're going to deal with immigration in general. We have two versions of an immigration bill, the Senate bill and the House bill. I prefer the House bill, which is not yet very bipartisan. I think we only have 3 Republicans on it. The House bill doesn't require that we build a wall over every inch of the border. It provides performance standards that we could meet through different technologies and approaches that might allow us to spend our money in a better way. But the point I always make about security is that these border crossings are about security as well. We spend so much time on the walls, but we ought to think about the doors. And I think if we recast the security discussion in Congress to a little bit about trade and the importance of security through trade, that would be helpful too. Finally, I guess the versions of the Senate version does a major increase in border police, frankly. That's probably a little bit overdone. I think that someone calculated that we would have enough police to station 1 every 1,000 feet across the whole border. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe that's not 24 hours, but that seems a little excessive. When what we really need we need blue shirts instead of green shirts. We need people who are going to help us check through trade and make sure trade is more functional and capture anything that we don't want crossing the border at the same time. I'm pleased to be part of this. I'm just starting my work on the border. I'm here joined by 2 gentlemen who have distinguished service already at the border and who I'd like to introduce, and then we can have a conversation. You all know Ambassador Medina Mora, who's built a distinguished career in both the public and the private sectors. Before coming to Washington, the ambassador was ambassador of Mexico to the United Kingdom until the beginning, from 2009 until the beginning of 2013. And prior to that appointment, he held cabinet-level positions in the Mexican federal government, was Attorney General, Secretary for Public Security, and Director General of the Center for Investigation and National Security, which is the Mexican Civil Intelligence Agency. And he served as a member of the Public Security Cabinet and the National Security Council. In these posts, the ambassador had important responsibilities in international fora and negotiations, including the Alliance for Prosperity and Security in North America, chief negotiator for Mexico-U.S. Border Partnership Agreement in 2002, a member of the high-level group on border security Mexico, Guatemala, and Mexico-Belize, and a key member of many delegations and bilateral task forces on security cooperation between Mexico, the U.S., Canada, Colombia, and Guatemala. In the private sector, was corporate director of strategic planning and deputy director general of the DESC Group, a large Mexican conglomerate in automotive parts, petrochemicals, agribusiness, and real estate, and he coordinated the legal advisory team to the Mexican national government during the North American Free Trade negotiations. He's lectured at conferences on the thing about the ambassador is that he knows something about everything, so we'll test him. So on trade, development, national security, terrorism, public security, organized crime, and human rights, in addition to your business career. Co-editor of the book Legitimate Use of Force, published by the National Institute of Criminal and Forensic Studies, and the book Fisheries in the Exclusive Economic Zone, published by the Ministry of Fisheries. He's a member of the Mexican Bar and American Bar Associations. Shortly after I arrived in Washington, I'm going to tell you a line. He probably is going to use it, but he had a great line that I'm sure we may hear again today. And he said, Mexico has 21st century trade with a 20th century narrative built on 19th century infrastructure. And his words demonstrated to me that we were on the same page when it comes to supporting border competitiveness and moving ahead together as nations. And before I turn it over to him, I think I'll also introduce my longtime friend, Alan Burson, who's a San Diegan for many years. He is now the acting Assistant Secretary for Policy and the Assistant Secretary for International Affairs and Chief Diplomatic Officer. Is that right? Is that all of them? For the Department of Homeland Security. He commenced his service as Assistant Secretary of International Affairs and Chief Diplomatic Officer for the department in 2012, where he oversees the department's international engagement and serves as the principal advisor to the Secretary on all international affairs. He previously served as Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, where he oversaw the operations of CBP's 57,000 employee workforce and managed an operating budget of more than $11 billion geared to protecting the nation's borders from all threats while expediting lawful trade. And one of my favorite moments when I was the head of the Port Commission in San Diego was when we were having some issues with CBP. And they said, who can we talk to? And they said, Alan Burson's going to be here. I said, I know Alan Burson. So all the CBP personnel were there. They were very nervous that the Port Commissioner, the chairman, was going to meet their boss. And he came up and gave me a hug, and I thought that really improved my leverage. But prior to this service in the federal government, he served as the chairman of the San Diego County Regional Airport Authority, is appointed by the mayor. He served as the California Secretary of Education under the Schwarzenegger administration. He served as Superintendent of Public Education in San Diego, where he launched a major reorganization of the district to focus its resources strategically on instruction and modernize its business infrastructure. And was a chairman of the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing. And before that, he was appointed by President Bill Clinton as the United States Attorney, which is the top federal lawyer for San Diego, our court region, and served for nearly 5 years as Attorney General's Southwest Border Representative, coordinating federal law enforcement on the border from South Texas to Southern California. He had a distinguished career also in the private practice of law, a number of other appointments, academic and professional. Received his AB from Harvard and was Phi Beta Kappa, a Rhodes Scholar, and got his JD from Yale. And the thing about Alan, I would say, too, is he's really one of the most effective people that I've met. He's as smart as any academic, but he played football at Harvard, and he also combined those things. So he was always a very, very smart person with a football mentality. He was going to break through the line. He's broken through many barriers in politics, and I'm looking forward to working with him on the border. So with those long introductions, you guys are so accomplished, I'll turn it over to the ambassador to make some comments.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Thank you, above all, for your very kind introduction. And I'm thrilled to be here with true, really experts, because you have lived the border. I have not. The only thing that can be underlined from what you said about me is that as my life has been driven by curiosity, the only two things that I have not done yet are taxi driver and bullfighter. So that doesn't make me any expert on the border, but I have been around for quite a while, and certainly very honored to share this panel with you and with my dear friend Alan Burson, who the only problem we have among us is that when he thinks football, he thinks of a different game than the real game, which, by the way, starting today, the World Cup. Well, that's a problem, maybe. Yeah, but I really thank the Wilson Center and Duncan Wood and Chris, who has been outstanding in terms of really understanding and helping us understanding the border. And I recognize the presence of Governor Cesar Duarte, a very good friend, former Speaker of the House and Governor of Chihuahua, who is here, and Alejandra de la Vega, a true inspiring person. Really, Alejandra, thank you for what you have done, and thank you for your sharing with us your experience and very moving commitment to the people in the border, which is what really matters. Well, of course, very much quoted Porfirio Diaz allegedly said, and I say allegedly because I have looked for the quote and I have never found really where he said that. But if not said, well said. Poor Mexico, so far from God, so close to the U.S. But then I heard at one point in time, President Shimon Peres from Israel, when he was the prime minister, that he said, no. Poor Israel, so close to God, so far from the United States. So actually, it's very clear that geography has been a blessing for both of us. It's just that we have some difficulties to really recognize and understand it. But the border is really the inflection point where the interaction of commerce, people, and cultures really build up a dynamic confluence of very intense exchange. And of course, the border, the obvious facts, 2,000 miles, 14 million people in an area that includes 6 Mexican states and 4 U.S. states. And together, combined, they represent the 4th largest world economy. And it's not a minor thing. We have over $1 million a minute of trade, over $500 billion of bilateral trade, $1.3 billion. It's $1 million a minute, $1.3 billion a day, over $500 billion a year between Mexico and the U.S. But 70% of this trade goes on through the border. And we have over 1 million people crossing that border legally on a daily basis. And throughout 56 ports of entry, around 300,000 vehicles, railroad cars, trucks, and cars crossing the border daily. So size and proximity matter. And then let me just say something that will give you some perspective on this. And of course, Alan and myself talk a lot about our southern border, the border with Guatemala. When you want to build up certainty, security, and of course infrastructure and advancement opportunities for people, you need things happening. And in terms of trade, the total trade between Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize in 2013 was $4.8 billion. Roughly 1 week of trade in the Nuevo Laredo crossing point in our northern border. So size does matter. Without critical mass, it is impossible to build infrastructure and very difficult to deal with security issues. So fortunately for us in the northern border, southwest border, we have something going on, lots of challenges, but volumes are actually a driver for security, opportunities, and advancing in terms of the well-being of our people. The quote that you refer, that was actually said by me, it is, yes, I repeat this quote frequently, but this is really coming from a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, Michael Camuñez, by the way, from California. I call him the philosopher from Las Cruces. Mm-hmm. And he said, yes, that we have a 21st century trade on top of a 20th century legal framework on top of a 19th century border infrastructure. We have some institutional mechanisms that have some work very well, some don't. The International Boundary and Water Commission that, of course, could benefit from some revision. The 21st Century Border Initiative that covers a broad scope of the common border issues, infrastructure, secure flow of goods and people, law enforcement. And, of course, the new approach from the North American Leaders Summit in Toluca and the high-level economic dialogue, we are now identifying the logistical corridors and regional development approach, because as size matters and then critical mass matters, it is important to identify the points in geography in which it really makes sense, as in Tijuana, San Isidro does, where you can build up volumes and pay for the infrastructure and the staffing. It doesn't make sense to have CBP 24/7 staffing in 56 points of crossing, or it is impossible. But it is possible to have it in 6 or 7 points in which you can build the volumes and pay for the infrastructure and pay for the staffings. And we have, of course, many opportunities that are already identified. Commissioner Kerlikowski was here this morning, and I was telling him that we talk a lot about this low-hanging fruit, which it gives us the idea that it is easy. It's not easy. But certainly it's obvious. And we have gone a long way, and it is possible to really learn from each other the single window approach in Mexico, and now what we can do in the US and Canada. And of course, merge our trusted traveler programs that we have already committed to do so, the Global Entry, the Nexus, and the Programa Viajero Confiable. And of course, move forward in terms of fast entry and ready lanes. We have a North American transportation plan coming from the Leaders Summit. And we have a fantastic opportunity here, particularly that we have our people, and Alejandra is a true example of this. But because our people in the border, and you, Alan, attest to this, beyond being bilingual, binational, bicultural, the U.S. Mexico border is a world in itself. And this border is the region as the lifeline of our joint economic future, and it is just time to embrace it. It's clear from the geographical perspective that we are not going anywhere. And I think that from here we can manage our border smarter, and we can do it in a much more efficient way. So we have to begin to manage the border to eventually create this into a seamless space of prosperity that will increase standards of living in both our societies. At the end, the border is about our people. And I would stress the border millennials, who are truly bilingual, binational, and bicultural, that were born in the era of globalization and the internet, and they are the NAFTA generation. We have a lot to learn from them. They have shared perspectives and beliefs that transcend nationalities and conquer stereotypes. And they facilitate new and adventurous interactions between our countries. So we need to find a new model to face the challenges of the 21st century and take advantages of this new world reality. It is clear to me that North America is the most promising and attractive economic area in the world, from the global realities, raising wages in Asia, and very high cost of energy elsewhere. And we have, of course, a fantastic balance between geography, resources, and demographics. And of course, with very low energy costs in our region, very low transaction costs that is possible from the reforms that we are embracing today, we must realize that the integration of our economies makes us stronger. So we need to build a strategic vision of North America with a holistic approach. The border is the place to start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. Ambassador, let me pick up where you left off after noting that as I watched the Los Angeles Kings and the New York Rangers play hockey, I warned my friends from Mexico and Brazil that over time, as we are likely to develop a football capacity that may well someday be worthy of challenging on a international stage. And we think that the integration of North America will be one way of accelerating that development. Let me pick up where the ambassador left off, which is that the story is about the border. Es la verdad, todos somos fronterizos. It is about the border, but it has a lot more to do with the emerging North America. This colossus of from Panama to the Arctic, now involving, for the most part, $3 billion a day between and among Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And the lesson and the point that we must work on as we build this enterprise over the next generation is to recognize that what is now important in our relationship is not the East-West relationship, not the line that La Linea that divides us, but rather the flows of goods and people, ideas and capital and labor that flow north and south from Mexico to the United States and vice versa, but also from Central America to the Yukon and vice versa. So what I'd like to do in the time before opening it up to questions, Congressman, is to talk about how we integrate, where the integration has put the border in a place, in the ambassador's words, as the place to begin. We build North America from inside out, from the borders out. We think of the borders as places that divided us for most of our history. And in fact, the borders can become the place that unite us and the place in which we actually accomplish the efficient North America by making cross-border movement fluid and efficient. And we do that because that is the way we compete with East Asia and the Indian subcontinent and ultimately Turkey, Indonesia, and Brazil, not on the basis of wage rates, but on the basis of quality and on the basis of logistical costs and efficiencies. And that's where the border can actually serve as a beacon for this future relationship. So where are we doing quite well? I'm happy to report as a federal official that bilaterally between the United States and Mexico, the relationship is almost entirely reversed from what it was certainly a decade ago, and I would argue even 5 years ago. The 21st century border declared by President Calderon and President Obama and embraced and advanced to the next step by President Peña Nieto has created the condition for the kind of cooperation that is really was unthinkable a generation ago. And we do the kinds of things together that we dreamed about that generation ago. So we have shared views on security and the need for security, but also the fact that security and expediting lawful trade and travel is actually the same process. They're not mutually exclusive processes. We have the Century Program and the Global Entry Program. We have the NEC program, the Nuevo Esquema for Empresas Certificadas, that mirrors the CTPAT program for trusted traders. All of that is moving well and right and focuses on north-south flow and efficiency. So my friends at the local level and the state level will take this criticism and as a challenge, not as a critique or a condemnation. One area of integration that we need to accomplish is that our border cities, Los Gamelos, that stretch from Matamoros and Brownsville to San Diego, Tijuana, still think respectfully in a east-west fashion. They think about gaining advantage for their sets of conditions in favor of their localities at the expense or in competition with the other sets of twin cities across the border. This is a political issue that needs to be confronted. So year in and year out, San Diego and Tijuana sent separate delegations to Mexico City and San Diego to lobby for the same things every year. We've seen an improvement, speaking for my hometown, San Tijuana. We've seen an improvement that at least the delegations are now joined. They travel together to Mexico City and to Washington, but in fact, it does not happen in concert with Juarez and El Paso. It does not happen in concert with Reynosa and McAllen. It's always separate delegations, with the consequence that we're not speaking about the border. We're speaking about the California-Baja California border, or the Chihuahua-New Mexico border, or the Tamaulipas-Texas border. We need to start developing the political coalitions that focus on north-south and that recognize that changes, whether it's in infrastructure or in procedure or investment or in taxation, that will benefit one set of border cities needs to be taken in the context of the entire border arrangement. The second is, in terms of integration, is the private sector, where I think there's actually been, it's the market has driven our private sector institutions to establish more and more links. Again, though, they are focused cross-border. The regional organizations are focused on those that are closest, and we do not see, even in such effective organizations as the Border Trade Alliance, having the ability to speak for the border in a way that's authoritative and that can produce results. So I urge my the governmental officials and private sector leaders to think not only locally but globally, and think in terms of how borders need to build in North America. The second and the last point I want to make in terms of integration is that we need to institutionalize what we do. We do not have institutions that survive personalities and that survive administrations, with the exception of, as the ambassador mentioned, the Boundaries and Water Commission have survived, but they are dealing basically with technical matters of boundary demarcation and of water administration. We need to have institutions that have the backing of the federal government in both countries and the backing of the state governments in both countries to actually handle issues of infrastructure and issues of everything from, in my mind, from preventing border violence to institutionalizing the kinds of infrastructure arrangements that will prevent the kinds of occasional mismatches that we have, although we're much better than we used to be. Parenthetically, I'd note, can you imagine for most of U.S. Mexican history, we did not have coordinating mechanisms on infrastructure. And now we have a binational system for actually comparing notes and agreeing on priorities. So in summary, the next stage, because the glass is always half empty and it's always half full, is that we need to think in the private sector and in the local and state governmental sector as borders as being the key to North America, and we need to build the political coalitions that will make that happen and that will eventually translate into the congressional alignments between the Mexican Congress and the United States Congress that will think in that manner. And then we need to build institutions to sustain this momentum that we have toward competitive borders and a competitive North America.
Thank you. Let me thank Alan. I'd just like to follow up on the Secretary's comments, because in San Diego we have something that's been fairly effective called the Smart Border Coalition, which is a collaboration of business people on both sides of the border and elected officials on both sides, and sort of bureaucrats, governmental types. And that's really helped us a lot in terms of collaborating. And the other thing I'd tell you, that's Mr. Vela was here before, my colleague from Brownsville, Philemon Vela. We're part of the Border Coalition in Congress, and one of the things we've been trying to do too is to think more nationally about the issue. And there's a big push within the Border Caucus to educate the rest of the Congress about what trade with Mexico means for your district, whether you're in Iowa or Wisconsin, because it's really remarkable the impact of trade, and I think that people aren't aware of. So there's some progress along that line, and maybe you've answered the question, but I guess I'd like each of you to address, you've talked about some of the process and political structures, but are there particular things you think we need to be on top of right now to make the border more efficient? And maybe that's the question you were just answering, but anything in addition to that, maybe in terms of even physical plant kind of issues?
I mean, I guess that we have lots of opportunities and things already going on. What we lack, and I liked the way Alan put it, it's the flows, not the line. Mm-hmm. What it's important is to have a shared perspective on the border. And what you do with your colleagues in Capitol Hill, trying to get a shared perspective of the border. We don't have one. Mm-hmm. It's fragmented in terms of tasks from the government perspective. It is fragmented in geographies. And it is fragmented actually in flows. So it might be a good thing to have is to gather all this experience and knowledge together, maybe in a sort of summit that actually gets all the perspectives from the economy, trade, infrastructure, demography, culture, politics, education, and try to build up a shared narrative for the border, which is what would make a difference for North America, actually. Canada and the U.S. have advanced a lot. And actually, it was relatively easy for me to negotiate a border safety agreement back in 2002. Of course, we were very much concerned on certain very specific issues, but the mechanisms were developed a few months before between Canada and the U.S. And, well, we just adapted them, and it was a no-brainer. We might find lots of no-brainers here if we can actually share the perspective in terms of geographies and in terms of a highly fragmented institutional approach. You're absolutely right. We have some institutions, but they all deal with their specific little piece, and we don't have a shared perspective. And this shared perspective needs involvement from the highest level of government, the private sector, and on top of everything, the people in the border. You know more than we do because you leave the border on a daily basis.
So just if I might, I agree with the ambassador's observation in terms of the changing the perspectives on this North American enterprise and having the basis for understanding widely so that it's really built into the DNA of our respective politics. Let me just, on one specific response, Congressman, to your question. So history is on our border is a mixture of unilateral, bilateral, and increasingly binational efforts. And what as we decrease the number of unilateral efforts and increase the number of bilateral efforts, we have to actually pick out those mechanisms that need to be developed binationally. So there are many that can be conceived, but politically there are only a few that are ripe that you can actually think about. But one that may be ripe for the kind of discussion it would take between our respective Congresses is that as the notion of public-private partnerships is now gaining currency, and you hear it, it's being talked about. But as we seek to implement it, we need to develop the same way we need a shared narrative in the broad context. We need a shared perspective on public-private partnerships. We cannot have different metrics. We cannot look at the business models in different ways and in fragmented ways. So one of the, as we build this infrastructure capacity, it increasingly needs to be binational. Starting, frankly, with the permitting process. That might be an initial place where we can say, when we license a bridge in Coahuila and Texas, it actually should go through a binational process that is more of the technical matter that we have. When we evaluate a business proposition, you cannot have one business proposition coming from the U.S. side and one coming from Mexico. Now, in the Tijuana, San Diego, Rodriguez field, we've somehow managed to do that, but it's taken almost 10 years to do it because we've been operating in a bilateral rather than a binational way. So this is the kind of.
That's what you mean when you say institutionalize these kinds of things. And so how would that take effect?
The easiest way for it to take effect is for our Congresses to act.
Oh yeah, well that's not so easy. Now you went theoretical on me. Well, let me ask you this: just sort of to.
No, actually, so that might be an area where you actually might have. Northern and southern border people from both parties
but are
finding
you suggesting
some merit.
that that's federal to federal, or do you think that this is something that happens, city to city?
I think this has got to be binational, but that could involve federal, state, and local entities from both sides of the border.
It has to involve federal, state, and municipal. The governors in the border, they actually gather together. It would be a good thing eventually to have the top people from the federal, the presidents, the governors, the mayors, and of course people from both Congresses to actually understand, put a common ground on looking at the problems and then finding some paths. And from there, maybe it's going to be easier to move forward in terms of actually debating and voting in Congress whatever is needed.
So I would just make an observation. Maybe I'd ask you, Ambassador, about the attitude of your federal government toward the border. I mean, ours is ambivalent. I think we have some misunderstanding in our federal government about the border. I think the president has been very aggressive and very open. I think our House of Representatives is, to be generous, I would say confused about the benefits of the border. So maybe, do you see something similar to that? Is that an obstacle in Mexico City?
We don't have the same approach. We have other problems. Yeah. For sure, no one in Mexico City, it's very difficult to really find in Mexico City, I mean, in the policy-making arena, someone or people who really understand the border as much as people in the border do. The same you do here. Of course, we have not necessarily the same concerns about the border, but I have it's very difficult to find areas of interaction among our countries which are more related to emotions and much less related to facts. Yes. And certainly it is very difficult to build up public policy, politics, and then actual decisions from this perspective. First of all, as you say, the facts are relevant, because if you do not really convey the fact that 6 million U.S. jobs depend on how much Mexico buys from the U.S., Mexico buys more from the U.S. than the BRICS combined, and by the way, more than the 8 countries that have already won the World Cup. Well, 9 with Mexico this year. But if it is not us this time, I would really hope that it is the U.S. It would really change the game in a fundamental way for the good. So just to give you some hope there.
You want to respond to that? Or?
The only, I wouldn't, I don't think that's in the cards this year. But we appreciate the sentiment. It reminds me, though, of the Canada regularly beating the United States in hockey games where we actually have some heightened capacity. And at the end of that, when we go off the ice and we've lost, we now say, what a shame, but we're so delighted that we made the Canadians so happy. So.
I had a question, too, about there's a lot of discussion about trade agreements, and now we have 20 years of NAFTA. How much of the efficiency on the border depends on, maybe you could assess kind of how that's affected it, and whether we need to make adjustments going forward, what those might look like?
Just quickly, and I'll defer to the ambassador, but NAFTA, when you look at the volumes and you look at the fact that before NAFTA, the bilateral trade between Mexico and the United States was $85 billion. I mean, it's hard to think that we had a bilateral trade there, and 20 years later, it's more than $500 billion, almost $500 billion dollars or more, and yet people. In both countries, but particularly in the United States, are hesitant to talk about NAFTA as being the kind of success for reasons that are known politically. But it seems to me that we should celebrate NAFTA for what it has brought, what the Tratado de Comercio Libre has brought to both countries and the prospects that it's created. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but I think we need to talk more broadly and take on, through a shared narrative of the kind the ambassador suggested, the bigger ideas. Now, a free trade agreement is one thing, but even if we don't adopt it, we should have serious discussions about a customs union, about what that means. And what a single market would mean, and we don't do that. But I think everyone who knows anything about the bilateral relationship knows that Mexico is the key to the future of the United States. And with all due respect to our brothers and sisters in Canada, Mexico will have the larger economy than Germany in one generation, 30 years from now. And that's where our future is really invested.
I would just only add to that it's really looking at North America, the North American idea, and how we can really build from there. There is an African saying that I also repeat quite frequently that states that there are two good moments to plant a tree, 20 years ago and right now. Well, we did plant a tree 20 years ago, and it has been quite good. But now it is the opportunity, and we are really obliged to plant a new one with this new perspective.
We started a little bit late. We're running a little short on time, but Chris told me I could take a couple questions from the audience. Do you have any questions? Sir?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. It's always great to see such distinguished members come out and enlighten us. I'm from the border, and one of the things that I always, coming from Laredo, Texas, I think it's important that we stop talking about the border if it was a fourth country. And we all follow that North American integration model saying, hey, a border issue is a national or a trinational issue. So therefore, my challenge to you all, when you go back, to the Congressman as well, is that we've got to continue this dialogue of talking about a North American integration has got to be very serious as to how we can take three countries with two borders and one economy. It has been written by many scholars as well. So my question to you all is that at what point do we really believe that our three governments can come together and really meet that challenge of a North American integration, of having that strong economy? Because for us on the border, NAFTA was just a framework plan. There hasn't been an economic framework plan since NAFTA that really has allowed the vitality of our three countries. Nothing's been there. Nothing's come close. Yet we've got to eliminate some of those swords that we live and die from, of our government saying, you can't do this, you can't do this, and saying this is what we can accomplish together. So my question to you all, and I know it's a challenging question, but what type of framework? Are we going to see that in our lifetime?
We had a vision, but we didn't have a plan. NAFTA was actually a set of rules. And what has been possible from that trade pact has been really possible not from public policy, or not too much from public policy, but from decisions that actually had been made and carried out by business people, by companies. And the border is critical because we face tremendous unbearable cost to cross the border, waiting times. I mean, it's nonsensical. We have to think how to solve this. And of course, there are some ideas. Technology is, of course, highly relevant. What we need is the strategic vision of the region, of the shared economic space looking towards the future. And the border, both borders, are actually critical to this. And I wouldn't diminish the role of Canada, because Canada has been very important into this integration process. It is important also for the Canadians to recognize that we actually bring more to the table combined as with two bilaterals. And that was proven 20 years ago. It will prove today, I'm sure.
Just, I join the ambassador, but it's a good question, and it is the seminal question, because before anything happens politically or in the business world, you need some intellectual engineering that builds the common framework by which people can reference the actions they take. The only thing I would suggest is that it will not happen solely as a governmental function. It will not happen if we wait for the governments to do it without the private sector, the NGO communities. I think the work that that's been done on the borders in San Diego, Tijuana, and Juarez, El Paso is the kind of activity. But we need to go beyond just los camelos. We need to actually articulate Laredo, Nuevo Laredo, but for the border. I join you. I think that's the work that's most immediately on our desk.
One more, sir.
Sam Bale, one of the original founders of the Border Trade Alliance, along with Jerry Schwebel. All of them, toward the end, Secretary Burson finally brought it back to, we have to have more than the governments involved. What are we doing to have success? We cannot use federal, state, and municipal to solve the problems. Until you get the private sector, where the money is in all these countries, to where there is a benefit for being involved and a benefit for solving problems, you don't get a solution. We organized five communities with 12 international bridges, and we were one of the 560 reimbursable programs. The first thing that we learned is when we went out and we put extra manpower on, we put double the manpower, but we got about 300% increase in production. What was happening? There was better management because people were watching. It's as if you had the congressman sitting at the bridge, or you had Commissioner Aguilar when he was there, or Secretary Burson when you were there, or when Aristoteles Nunez is at the ports of entry. When people are looking, they do their job and they do it efficiently. It's all about management, private sector techniques, just like Ryder Systems was talking about earlier. When we put those into the mix and we put the private money into the mix, then we're going to have solutions that are long-lasting. Because we don't do things for 1 year or 2 years or even 5 years. We do them for 15 or 20 years. Okay. And when we take that attitude, just like Petróleos Mexicanos is opening up their energy sector to private investment, one of the best advantages to that is they have somebody auditing the books other than somebody from the inside.
So a suggestion for private sector involvement and oversight as well.
I mean, we could not do it without them. Actually, when governments agree on building infrastructure where there is no business carried out, well, it's impossible to pay for the infrastructure. It's impossible to really improve the service. Yeah. It is really business driven. Yeah. The flows are made by actual companies doing transactions. It is not from the very wise people in the government.
That's right.
And also recognize Commissioner Aguilar, a very good friend, David. Thank you.
We are nearing the very end. I'm not allowed to take any more questions, but maybe offer the chance to say some concluding remarks. Secretary?
I think this has been a good opportunity to explore throughout the day where the borders can play the central role in building this North American enterprise and what has to happen on the border. And I think, actually, I think I always learn something from being near Eduardo Medina Mora, and I have again today. We can actually focus in on building this shared narrative and then start to develop this framework for I hesitate to call it NAFTA 2.0, but it really is NAFTA 2.0. What is the next step in the relationship? And Sam, I agree. The initial efforts can take place between think tanks like the Wilson Center and the private sector to generate the energy, intellectual and otherwise, to start down this next phase of our history.
From NAFTA to North America, our shared economic space, it happens here. And the future, the most vibrant economic area in the world, is not in Asia, it's not China, it's here, it's us.
I'd say one of the things I appreciate from being from San Diego, and some of my colleagues from there will appreciate, is that we're really known for collaboration among governmental entities within the private sector. It sounds like that's a large part of what we aspire to do at a larger scale among all these different entities. And so I look forward to working with you both to do that. I'd say one of the really fun things about this job, other than the plane rides, which I really enjoy, is the opportunity to sit up here on a panel like this and learn from a gentleman like you. It's an honor to be with you today. And it's just good to know we have such quality people working on our border, and I'm very optimistic with that in that respect. And with that, I'll turn it back to Chris.
Thank you very much, Congressman Peters, Ambassador Medina Mora, and Assistant Secretary Burson. We're just going to take 2 minutes real quick to close up the whole conference. We had a group of us sort of huddling every week to put this together, and one of those people was Hildardo Gutierrez from the Asociación de Empresarios Mexicanos. I just want to let him say 1 minute to recognize the work that he's done. Thanks.
Literally 2 minutes. I know people in this room have been waiting for this day like 4 years or so. Distinguished members of the panel, ambassador, secretary, congressman, gobernador, good friends and colleagues. Today, at least in my view, all expectations were surpassed. I'm really honored to have been part of this organization, working closely with Martin and Flavio at ProMexico. Honored to work with Noe and Jesse at the VTA, and of course honored to work with Chris and Duncan in what I consider today to be the house of some of my publications and hopefully of many more publications to come. We work also with countless of people and the support of the Asociación de Empresarios Mexicanos in San Antonio and others like Tony Carbia, a good friend. I think we all work like good neighbors. I think that the narrative that was discussed, at least in this last panel, is that of good neighbors. And just I have 4 questions. What does it take to be a good neighbor? Knowing your neighbor, which is one of the exercises that we actually put out there today. Talking to your neighbor, working with your neighbor. Focus more on the assets and the opportunities of your neighbor and not only on the challenges. What we did today, in my view, and the view of a lot of the people that I talked to during the day, it's a new beginning amongst neighbors and challenge accepted. I think that the private sector has to play a more active role, and I think it's on us to follow up and follow through with these ideas and the applications and actions to change the dialogue moving forward and distinguish some of these actionable ideas that are the trademark of this house that generally hosted us today. This is a new era of entrepreneurial activism, business activism, una nueva era del activismo empresarial, a new era of a closer, more transparent and diligent conversation between our 2 countries. The reality and destiny of our nations is linked by history, geography, society, and business. En la Asociación de Empresarios Mexicanos, we want to foster this new dialogue between the public and private sector, between Mexico and the United States. In the AEM, we want to lead the way to continue building bridges, not only the physical infrastructure, but the political, the legislative bridges, intellectual and academic bridges. Bridges that ultimately will make Mexico and the United States better neighbors, better partners, and better friends. Thank you.
That's good. So we've had the chance to hear from our other 2 partners today, the Border Trade Alliance, who hosted this event with us. We thank Noe, we thank Jesse for your support, for making this all possible, and of course, ProMexico. Thanks so much again. We couldn't have done this without you. We couldn't have done this without a lot of people. It takes a village to make an event like this happen. So I just want to say quick thanks to Ali Cordell, Miguel Salazar, Maria Estela Gatsulis, Maria Landa, Eugenio Weigand, Amira Samoa, Nayeli Dominguez, who are all here at the center, who helped just hold things together, hold all the strings together today. Our sponsors, IBC Bank, Union Pacific, and UETA Duty Free Americas. Thank you so much to the Congressional Border Caucus, especially to Congressman Filimon Vela, but to all the members of the Border Caucus for the work that they do in pulling together, a grouping from across the border. As Secretary Burson mentioned, that's one of the challenges that's faced, and it's a great organization that's doing that at the congressional level. We thank them for their support in hosting this event and a reception last night. Thanks to all of our panelists, and lastly, but definitely not leastly, thanks to all of you for coming today. We really could not have had such a positive, amazing event without so many folks from the border, from here in Washington, coming together to have dialogue over such an important issue. So thanks again.
I learned something. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So good to see you, man.